Hi, and welcome to Integrative Cancer Solutions with Dr. Karlfeldt. A cancer diagnosis is one of the hardest slap in the face imaginable. All of a sudden, you have to become an expert in cancer and its treatments because your life depends on it. Oncologists, family, and friends are pushing you towards chemo, radiation, surgery, yet you feel there are additional solutions out there. You don't feel confident in that only traditional therapies will take care of it. You may, as I have, seen family or friends quickly go downhill from harsh medical treatments. There is a better way. I invite you to listen to stories from real people fighting cancer successfully through powerful, integrative, and holistic methods. Learn what they did. This is my gift to you to make the learning curve less steep after your diagnosis. The information in this podcast could save your life as it has others. Welcome to Integrative Cancer Solution with Dr. Karlfeldt. Today, I'm just going to chat a little bit. Usually we have a guest on, but I wanted to go through a little bit more in detail in regards to cancer, and also some about the photodynamic therapy that we offer that aren't that many in the United States. That offer it actually, I'm not sure if there's anyone in the United States that offers the way that we do. And so I want to just kind of go through a little bit about cancer, some case reports that might be interesting. And some of them have had, you heard them here on this podcast so that you've gotten to hear their story. But I want to just kind of bring it all together a little bit so you have a feeling about what we're talking about. So cancer, that obviously, the question is always, what is cancer? Why do we get it? And why does somebody get it and somebody else does not get it? I mean, we know that in reality, I mean, at this point, almost like 50% of us at some point are going to get cancer. And the statistics are that, between 30 to 25 to 30% of everyone that gets cancer will then die from cancer. And I think the reoccurrence, once I've had cancer, the reoccurrence of it is, I believe it's like 85% or something like that. It's really high. So it is something that's really important to be able to understand, and so that we can address it fully. Obviously, the best cancer to have is the one that you never get. So prevention is key. So absolutely, if we're recognizing we're dealing with a health condition that is this difficult, this complex, and hits so many of us out there, then how important it is then to make sure that we take every possible step that we can to try to prevent it. And in essence, what that becomes is to analyze your lifestyle, analyze your stress level, analyze the chemicals that you're exposed to, just to kind of look around your exercise level, and to optimize then your life and your health. And dental issues becomes really, really important. I just spoke to Dr. Yu, I call him the parasite doctor, because he's really good at it. And you have leading experts like myself that lean on him for that. And he was just confirming the knowledge, that I've had and that we've spoken about in prior podcasts, how important it is to address underlying hidden dental infections and the impact that can have on your immune system, and then also the driving force of chronic conditions, health conditions, and cancer that can have. So to not minimize the importance of that. So cancer, we know it's a very multifactorial condition. So what that means is that, the biggest issue that the majority of people have, they become very tumor focused, and they determine the efficacy of the therapy just based upon whether the tumor is shrinking or going away, or if it's growing. And that becomes kind of the biggest factor. So when in reality, what you have to look at is that the cancer exists within an environment. And it is that environment that allows it to either thrive or to starve and then hopefully die out. So by adjusting the environment, it's just like the fish bowl. In order to be able to make that fish thrive, you create an environment that allows it to thrive. And or if you have an environment that's not beneficial, it will then eventually die. So it's the same thing for us. It's the same thing for cancer. Obviously the environment that makes us thrive is different than the environment that a cancer will thrive in. So you will then really look at all the different factors that would then promote cancer growth. And so again, cancer is multifactorial. So you can't just go in and hit it with one therapy and think that that is going to be it. And that is why there's such failure in regards to the traditional cancer care, is that, again, I've mentioned this many times, it's fantastic at reducing tumor size. It is not that good in increasing quality of life, longevity, and reoccurrence. I think, in fact, after all the billions of dollars that's been spent on traditional, all the research, the traditional care, cancer care, and also all the millions and millions of people that have received that type of therapy, the extension of life, maybe, I think it was like a little bit less than 3 months that you extended life, with traditional care. And so you can see that people that feel, and people that come to me and they say that the family pushed them towards doing chemo, radiation, and surgery, and they feel that that is the more safe thing to do. I mean, that is, if you're going to protect yourself against cancer and then get rid of the cancer, that it is better to lean on the therapy that is more well respected and researched and so forth, not recognizing that the statistics show that with that type of care, you in essence increase life by a little bit less than 3%. And if you then see then the cost of those type of therapies, and then also the impact it has on your quality of life, in order to be able to extend your life for those 3 months. So it is, again, just kind of to reiterate the point, how important it is to just not lean on that type of therapy, but to go after it from many different angles at one time. So cancer, what is it? Well, it is multifactorial, and it is also a survival mechanism, meaning that there's a certain tissue in the body that is trying to survive, and this can be due to trauma, and that trauma can be spiritual, emotional, mental, chemical, nutritional. And so cancer kind of arises out of that survival mechanism. So as an example, if the tissue is hypoxic or doesn't have enough oxygen, or if it doesn't have enough nutrition to support energy production within that cell, the energy has then to shift from using the mitochondria to more of a fermentation cycle, where it then ferments sugar in order to be able to produce energy. So again, that is a survival mechanism due to lack of oxygen, due to lack of nutrition. And it can also be due to, talking about trauma. It can then be due to chemical or heavy metal or a pathogenic assault on that mitochondria, so that it is dysfunctional. So now, again, because of a dysfunctional mitochondria, that cell has to shift how it produces energy as a survival mechanism. So we can't then just, thinking that cancer is just when everything has gone wrong. It's actually a survival mechanism for that cell. And what we need to do is obviously remove the reason for that it has to go into that kind of a survival mechanism. And also I look upon cancer as kind of like a separation of self. It's when you have an area when we're not really connected with who we are, and connected with our purpose, connected with what makes us happy, what brings us joy, connected with community, and maybe we have some emotional trauma in the past, and that's kind of shifting our belief system about ourselves, so we don't really accept ourselves as who we are. So then you create kind of like a a little kind of a discord, an energetic discord within yourself, a frequency discord, and that shifts on the behavior of that tissue where you're holding that energy. Because if you are holding maybe guilt or anger or something that is not in line with who you are, you got to store that somewhere. And that tissue where you're storing it, the energy is going to shift there towards something that is different than yourself. And that's kind of how I look upon cancer, as something different than yourself. And it is important also, obviously, here at the Karlfeldt Center where I'm at, we offer a lot of these fancy different therapies. The photodynamic therapy is what I consider a kind of one of these fancy therapies, because it costs money, and it is something that is very kind of cutting edge. But all these kind of cutting edge therapies, if you don't look upon the basics, then you're losing kind of the effect of these fancy therapies. So you want to make sure that you address the basic components, like I talked earlier about your emotional well-being, your nutritional well-being, your chemical exposures, your exercise. So these are different basics. I to kind of make it easier, what I've done is to structure it into supporting. I call it supporting the 5 elements. Because the 5 elements are what we consist of. So we have earth. That we're talking about. Your nutrition, your food, and there can be also your supplements, and if you need to hit it a little bit harder with nutritional IVs, like heavy dose of vitamin C IV or glutathione or whatever it may be, or just. So that's kind of that earth aspect, and we want to make sure we support the nutrition. And then you have the water component. So we got earth, water, air, fire, and then the spirit. Those are the 5 elements. So we want to make sure that all of them are supported and all of them are in balance. And so that when you are creating a plan as you're fighting cancer, or you're wanting to prevent cancer, then that you are then including all these elements, so that you don't become you don't end up in a imbalance, where one area is weaker, giving then cancer an area where it can then progress. So water, then you want to make sure you drink high quality water, structured water, and something that is really become more of a highlight is these deuterium depleted water. Deuterium is a very heavy molecule, and that tends to then impede our mitochondrial activity. Water is something that obviously our mitochondria require, and also it helps to transport nutrients to places, to the cells, and then to move toxins out of the cells. And if you have a better quality structured water, it then is much more efficient in doing this. And then also, on my radio show, I interviewed a scientist. His name is Dr. Gerald Pollack, and he talks about something that is called easy water, or exclusion zone water, where you actually see that the water in itself, it creates a separation and generates like a battery from that separation, and that is what creates a lot of energy within the cell. To help to then repair the cell, so that the mitochondria doesn't become dysfunctional. So that's air, water, and then you have air. Obviously, you want to make sure that you breathe good quality air. You're out in the nature, exercising, and really taking deep breath. You can do meditations, breathing meditations, where you're focusing on your breath. Where you kind of sit quietly for 10 minutes and just focus on your breath, where you're focusing on the sensation kind of at the tip of the tip of your nose, kind of how the air is passing through, or the kind of stimulation as you're breathing in, breathing out, just in the tip of the nose. And you're sitting there for 10 minutes and then establishing a healthy breathing pattern. But then if you want to kind of use stronger therapies like what we have here, using something called the Hockett, where we runs about 10 different therapies, but a couple of them include then the ozone and also carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide actually functions like a signaling molecule that drives oxygen deeper into the tissue and actually allows oxygen to enter into the cell. Without a proper balance between carbon dioxide and oxygen, we're not able to get oxygen. We get it into our lungs, but we're not able to transport it into the cells. So Hocket helps with that. Or hyperbaric, where we are breathing 100% oxygen, and you can also do what's called air breaks while you're in there, but that helps to then drive oxygen deeper into tissue without the need of circulation. So you can then get oxygen into oxygen poor tissues, where the circulation is also poor. And that also, in addition to just as for prevention or while you're dealing with cancer, is also very important while you're dealing with like radiation, or, if you do radiation or chemotherapy, because they require oxygen in the tumor in order to be able to oxidize the tumor cells or the cancer cells. And towards the core of a tumor, you really don't have a lot of oxygen because there's not a lot of blood supply in that area. So you're using something like hyperbaric will then help to oxygenate that tumor, and doing that in preparation for radiation or chemo, like the day before, even the day of, can be extremely helpful. Or you can do things like ozone IV, something else that we do here, or breathing hydrogen, that can also help tremendously. And then for the fire, there you have obviously sun, it's fire. And a lot of us are actually light deficient because we don't spend much time out in the sun. And also because many of us are afraid then of skin cancer. So we think it's a better thing to do is to not be in the sun. In reality, sun is very nutritive. It's a vital nutrient for us that we require for health. So there are different ways, and that if you are not in the sun enough to bring then light into your life. So obviously sunshine is great to make sure that you do that. And if you're afraid of skin cancer, then don't be out in the sun when it is the hottest. And so you can be a little earlier in the day, later in the day, but still try to expose as much of your skin with sunlight as possible. And all the nerve endings along your skin will actually stimulate your immune system and your nervous system, and help to balance that out. So that's why in the old days you actually had temples, healing temples erected, for people to be there and heal just with sunlight. If you're then very deficient, again, then you are more prone to disease. And so then you can bring in things like the photodynamic therapy. One component of that is an intravenous laser light. So you can actually charge your bloodstream directly with light on the different parts of the spectrum. Like, what we have here at the center is ultraviolet. We have blue, we have green, we have yellow, we have red, infrared, and all of these different wavelengths or different colors, they impact the body in different ways. So, like the UV and blue, they tend to kill off a lot of pathogens, and yellow is very antiviral, and red and infrared stimulate the immune system. But then you have the blue that supports and the production, or I wouldn't say production, the release of nitrous oxide, which is a very anti-aging signaling molecule, and they've seen that it helps to prevent the breakdown of the telomeres, which determines the length of your life in a way. And also it helps to dilate the blood vessels to bring more oxygen and nutrients to tissue. And it does a bunch of other things as well. And then also you have the green that's great for the cardiovascular and for your red blood cells, and for the health of that. And then also you have the yellow that's kind of like your sunshine vitamin. It actually helps them with increase of serotonin levels and vitamin D levels. And then the red, as I mentioned, it helps them with the immune system and tissue repair and activation of healing and so forth. And what's great is that all these different colors, they impact the mitochondria, which is the energy factory of the cell, at different points. We have something called the electron transport chain, within the mitochondria, and it just kind of helps to activate that flow, with the different frequencies, like, blue, UV, ultraviolet and blue activates in one area, green, yellow, another area, the red and infrared in another area, just to kind of support that mitochondrial activity. So by fueling ourselves with that light, intravenously, we are really recharging the battery in addition to all these additional benefits that it has. So, and you can, obviously you can also do external laser, but the intravenous is just a really cool type of therapy that has really kind of brought therapy to the next level. And then spirit, working on your emotional aspect, your connection to God, your connection to community, connection to yourself, who you are, and using then different therapies to be able to identify stressors or blockages that you have within yourself that's interfering with connecting with your full potential. So if you hold on to trauma, and people say that time heals all wounds, and it's true in some way, but in a lot of ways, what I'm seeing is that time just puts you further away from where you stored the trauma, so that you are less like it's still playing in the background, but you've been able to figure out how to function and how to exist while that trauma is playing on your hard drive, so to say. And so you just developed a lot of compensatory patterns in order to be able to function fully. I wouldn't say fully, but to function without disturbance and interference while these traumas are playing in the background, sucking energy, because you have to kind of maintain that old pattern since you're holding on to it. And that requires a lot of energy. So if you then have a lot of these things playing in the background, they all suck out energy, which will then interfere with your ability to fight off infectious agents, to detoxify, to repair tissue, for your mitochondria to function optimally. So that's why it's important to clear these things out. At our center, we use a technique called APN, or applied psychoneurobiology, which is a way to identify, where the traumas are, where they're located in the body, when they arose, if it relates to parents, father, mother, or, maybe it's even back a few generations, because sometimes we can actually just kind of hold that pattern for, past generations, even though it did not really relate to us. So it is important that we then identify them. And then by identifying them and recognizing them, you have the ability to clear them. So other techniques, pretty much any kind of trauma release technique that works for you, that you resonate with. As I said, we use APN here. EFT is another technique. That emotional freedom technique is another technique that you can use as well. A common technique is a EMDR, but also, don't forget prayer, meditation, stress management, all of these different things, those can become, prayer is a powerful, powerful tool to heal old traumas as well. And a lot of times each individual may need to do these things in combination, and you need to find the combination that seems to be the most effective for you, because sometimes one therapy works better for one individual versus another. So you just got to kind of find your perfect mix in that way. So the key then is to kind of identify, what kind of environment do I want to create, to starve cancer? So then you have to look at, if you create an environment in your body where your cells are healthy and they're healthy functional cells, that means that they are all harmoniously connected to the whole. It means that there's not that separation of the self, and they they all are part of your identity, so to say. You're not having trauma stored in areas, and they can all communicate and function appropriately. And also you create then that healthy internal and external environment, where you create an environment and community and relationships and connection to God, that is healthy and supportive. And then also move, if you have been exposed to toxins, that you support the cleansing of that, cleaning that out in order to be able to create that healthy internal and then also then the healthy external environment. And that is what starves cancer. It's creating that healthy terrain that will then starve cancer. And then that becomes really important to be able to do. So looking then at the different therapies, so that's kind of setting up the environment, that is healthy, that will then support the prevention of cancer, and also will create the foundation in regards to how we are able to then go after it, maybe with some of the novel or more powerful therapies, while you then have these foundational components there. And without the foundational components, these other kind of more heroic or powerful therapies that we offer, they're not very effective. I mean, you will receive some impact, and again, kind of like the traditional cancer therapies, you'll see shrinkage and you'll see certain benefits, but the long-lasting effect will not be there if you don't address it on a foundational level. And that's important. So just to kind of run through, to get a feeling, and I'll do a continuation of this podcast actually next week, so you can listen to that. But I want to just kind of run through some of the IV therapies during the 2-week protocol, because we have patients flying in from all over the United States and even from other countries to go through our 2-week protocol, because it is so unique and it isn't offered in many places in the world. So we use a powerful photosensitizer agent called nano-ICG. It's a small form of a photosensitizer. It's called ICG, and photosensitizer helps to draw light into itself. So if you can get it to be positioned within the cancer cell, then it will then pull light towards the cell, and it will trigger a burst of energy, a burst of what's called reactive oxygen species, and that will then help to kind of kill off then the cancer cells. So the structure then of this ICG, this photosensitizer, becomes really important, because you want it to accumulate then in tumor tissue versus healthy cells. So it is then done in a little larger package. It's still nano, meaning that it's very small, but it is in a package that is small enough to enter into the blood vessels of tumors, because blood vessels of tumors are very leaky, because they are nutritional deficient. So they require a lot of nutrients and require a lot of things that they can feed on in order to be able to exist, because they're not very energy efficient in how they produce energy. In fact, they're like almost 20 times less efficient than 20 times less. I would say a 20th less. How do you do that? Yeah, so a cancer cell would produce 2 units of energy when a healthy cells would produce 38 units of energy from the same amount of building blocks of sugar, of glucose. So it's not very efficient, which means that it needs to kind of suck up as much nutrients as possible as it can. And so benefiting from that means that, we will then intravenously introduce substances that will then accumulate into the tumor tissue because of these leaky blood vessels. And nano-ICG is designed in a very specific way. In fact, I know that the pharmacist that designed this is a brilliant gentleman, And it's really taken our therapies to the next level. Other IVs, and I'm not going to go into all of them because I don't want to be too long, but we use, things like methylene blue, the laser therapy, intravenous laser therapy that I talked about, artesunate, vitamin C with DMSO, ozone, mistletoe, curcumin, poly-MVA, DCA, and then additional therapies that people will receive when they're here during their 2 week, things like the APN I talked about, prayer, we call that God's healing love. Then we work on the lymphatic, with a Vibe machine, and also something is called Flow Presso that helps to kind of move lymphatic, and then also helps to impact the cancer in a lot of ways. I'm not going to go through all of these because then we would sit here for another 5 hours. And we use ultrasound, sonotherapy, sound bowl bath, PEMF units, shockwave therapy, hyperthermia, hyperoxidative therapy, RI frequencies, peptide therapy, repurposed drugs, diet, nutraceuticals, autonomic response testing, ionic foot bath, coffee animals becomes important, laser energetic detox, AO scans, genetic supplementation. So these are just kind of what a 2 week program, along with all the IVs and things that you're doing, that it entails. So let's wrap it up. I think I've given you, I was planning to be able to get through much more of my content, but I don't want to let it run too long. I'll continue with the rest for next week. So have an awesome rest of the day. And I'm excited that you guys tuned in and listened. The information in this podcast is for educational purposes only, and it's not designed to diagnose or treat any disease. I hope this podcast impacted you as it did me. Please subscribe so that you can be notified when new episodes are released. There's some excellent shows coming up that you do not want to miss. If you're enjoying these podcasts, please take a moment to write a review, and please don't keep this information to yourself. Share them with your family and friends. You never know what piece of information that will transform their lives. For past episodes and powerful information on how to conquer cancer, go to integrativecancersolutions.com. If you would like to know more about the cutting-edge integrative oncology therapies my center offers, please visit thekarlfeldtcenter.com. Thank you for spending this time with us, and I hope to see you at our next episode of Integrative Cancer Solutions with Dr. Karlfeldt.